First up, so Meta just dropped a bombshell with pretty big implications for the world of AI. The company announced that its new powerful large language model, something called LLaMA 2, will be available free of charge for research and for commercial use. So, what this means is that the model is what we would call open source, which means anyone can copy it, build on top of it, remix it, and use it however they see fit. Now, one reason this is so important is it puts an extremely powerful large language model right into anyone's hands and gives them the appropriate permissions to build commercial products with it. Now, another reason this matters is it actually signals a major strategic direction that Meta is taking here in order to compete with some of the other AI companies out there. And this direction could have some effect on AI safety. That's because, some major AI players in this space place serious restrictions on the use and release of their models. And that's often, at least partially, due to concerns about how models could be misused if they're put in the wrong hands without guardrails. Meta is taking the exact opposite approach. They believe that by getting this technology out there into the world, into anyone and everyone's hands, will actually make the technology better in a much faster cadence. And it will more quickly help Meta reveal and address issues that contribute to safety, like using the model, say, to produce misinformation or toxic content. Um, so, as we look at this topic, Paul, like how big a deal is this?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely shakes up the whole industry. From an open source perspective, the general feedback I've seen is it is the most advanced open source model
Mm,
overall. So Falcon 40, I think, was maybe the most powerful one. But it seems as though Llama 2 is on par with GPT 3.5, and in some cases, maybe even GPT 4 in terms of its capabilities and testing. So that's a huge deal. And then the thing that really was surprising to me was that they came to market with Microsoft.
yes.
So the fact that they announced this through a partnership with Microsoft, it was almost a joint announcement. I just thought that was really interesting. Like at first I stepped back, I'm like, okay, what did I miss here? Like how did I not like see this one coming? Or was there nothing to see? Like they just kind of came out of nowhere and did this. But I think what caught me off guard was just because of Microsoft's obviously deep relationship with OpenAI
Mm.
and everything being powered by GTP3 and GPT4, that they would also make a major bet in the open source space and do it with Meta. Like, I don't know, it was kind of out of nowhere to me. So I thought that was interesting, but it obviously adds immediate legitimacy to what they're doing.
Mm.
We've talked about on the show many times that Meta is a sleeper in all of this. Like everyone, pays so much attention to Google and DeepMind within Google and Microsoft and OpenAI and AWS is, been getting in the conversation. And Meta, outside of maybe Google and OpenAI has probably the most advanced AI research lab in the world.
Mm.
And so the fact that they're doing stuff like this is a huge deal. And putting the power of open source, like an advanced open source model into the wild, I mean, it's a game changing thing. And I'm not a fan of like the whole game changing nomenclature for everything, but this one feels very significant. And I think even in the first week, you've seen just massive amounts of innovation being built on top of this model. So yeah, it just seems like it's a prelude for a lot of innovation to come based on this.
What did you make of these kind of competing approaches to AI safety? So, on this one hand, we've got some major people thinking that safety comes from, careful, controlled building and release of AI technology. Others, like Meta, are truly just saying we will get it out as fast and as far as possible, believing that transparency and usage are some of the best guardrails against how AI models can go wrong. Do you have any kind of read there on which approach makes the most sense, what the merits are of each one?
I hope they're right. I mean, we've talked about the closed versus open source before. Honestly, like the open source ideas terrify me. Like
Mm.
I really think that when we look at what can go wrong with AI, I feel like open source accelerates that dramatically. Like we're going to find out way faster what can go wrong with AI because the bad actors have access to the same powerful tools as the good guys. And so I find that scary, honestly. I don't know which is the better approach. I can sit and listen to debates on this all day about, who's right in this scenario. I feel like OpenAI, was obviously the open approach, and they very clearly changed their direction, and they've been very straightforward in why they changed their direction, and they seem extremely confident it's the right play.
Mm.
But I feel like there's no turning back. The open source is going to be a part of this ecosystem. We don't get that choice now. It's only going to become more advanced, and people are going to build capabilities on top of these foundational models that are now out in the wild. So it's kind of a debate that just doesn't matter. Like it's already out there. We now get to find out if
Mm.
it was good or bad. And like I said, I think the open source, the availability of these advanced models, open source is going to accelerate innovation in a good way. So all the positives that can come from AI are going to come faster, and it's going to accelerate them in a bad way. And I think we're going to be hit with some crazy stuff in the second half of this year, in terms of how these things are used that present risk to security and privacy and all kinds of stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like we're going to find out. It's out there. There's no change in the direction now.
We're doing an experiment in real time,
Yeah,
basically.
on humanity, basically. There we
Oh
go.
boy. So it does beg the question, this is obviously important. Open source models appear to becoming more prevalent. What does your average marketing or business leader need to be thinking about here, if anything?
This is something I'm very intrigued by, and I also don't know the answers yet. I don't think anybody really does. Is if you're a CMO or a CIO or CTO or whatever it is, and you're going to be charged with figuring out how to infuse large language models into your marketing, sales, service, ops, HR, every aspect of the business is going to have language models at the foundation of them. What do you build on? And so you can go to someone like Jasper, sponsor the show, and they kind of, a symphony of language models based on the use case, and you can customize them based on brand, tone, and style, and policies, and all these things. So that's one solution, is you go to an application company that's kind of the best of these models and helping you figure this out for you. Or you go and get an open source model and you customize it on your own data. You keep everything in house, nothing leaves, the guarded walls, protects, confidential information, privacy. I don't know. Like I haven't yet seen anything definitive that clearly states this. I know we're going to talk later on about Cohere teaming up with McKinsey.
Mm.
So I think you're going to start to see this where a lot of organizations are going to turn to their trusted advisors and consultants, say, what do we do? And
Mhm.
so a lot of those, the middle companies like the McKinseys, are going to have to try and make some bets. But again, just look at Microsoft and the fact that they have OpenAI at the core of everything, building it into their own technology, and yet they're doing a deal with Meta. So
Mhm.
they're playing both sides. Like and even Amazon's the same way. You can go get Amazon's, what was it, Titan or Bedrock or whatever their
Mhm.
language model is, but you can also get Anthropic and Cohere and like all these other ones. So it just feels to me right now like no one actually knows whether open or closed is going to be best within an enterprise. And the reality is it may be a mix of them. Um, yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I think that's the thing though, as a marketer, as a business leader, I'd be really thinking about here is what do we do?
Mhm.
How do we build language models into our organization moving forward? Who do we work with?
Gotcha. Yeah, and we did mention, I believe on last week's episode, the importance of marketers, both individually and at the leadership level, testing multiple tools, models, and
Yeah.
platforms as much as possible, even though it is a bit messy and a bit of a lift. You have to be looking at different models relatively regularly for a handful of your core use cases because of how quickly they move and advance. And open source just supercharges that.
Yeah, and I think that brings out an interesting point about how quickly these things evolve and how, one can leapfrog the other so quick, but
Mm.
also that this is not traditional software. This isn't like, version 5 remembers everything version 4 had and they just like make it way better and add a bunch of features. When you make version 5, you're basically rebuilding from the ground up everything. Like it doesn't remember all it did. That's why they have to train these things. That's why they have to stop the training data at a certain time period. They have to then red team the thing, make sure it's safe, make sure it's aligned, make sure it has the proper guardrails. So it's just not like if you pick a model today,
Mm,
It doesn't seem conceivable that you can just assume for the next 3 to 5 years you're good, and, like, whatever they bring out next works, because often at times what happens, and we'll talk about this in a later topic, is changes can be made and all of a sudden it just doesn't work as well as it did.
mhm,
And the reality, again, we'll touch on this in a minute, is they don't know why. Like they can't just go into the code like you would in traditional software and be like, oh, there's the bug
mm,
and fix the bug. You have to try and like analyze these things. In some cases, like philosophically, what could it possibly be doing different based on something that changed? Is it the training data? Is it a change we made? Is it a guardrail we put in place that had downstream effects we didn't expect? These things are, they're unknown how they really work. And so it's just not, there's no like very clear, here's the blueprint, here's how you pick a language model and like go. I don't even expect those to emerge. Like, I don't
mm,
know that there can be a definitive source on how to do this in an enterprise. And I think that's why it's going to be such a unknown and critical area for businesses moving forward is like, this is the Wild West right now.
mm. It's a really good point.